So we acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of country throughout Australia and their continuing connection to land, waters and culture. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders who are present here today. Since this is the virtual event, I do encourage you to include the lands that you are on if you know. You can pop that into the chat function. I'm currently on the Whadjuk land of the Noongar Nation. Welcome everybody to our symposium today. I'm Sharon Parker and I am the lead of the organisations and mature workforce component of CPAR, which is our Centre of Excellence in Population Ageing Research, and I'll tell you a little bit about that in a minute. So I'm going to just say a few introductory remarks, and then I'm absolutely delighted to introduce Professor Dorien Kooij, who is our presenter today. And sorry, Dorien, I realise I should have got some advice on how to say your surname. I don't know if I got that right. You can correct me later. And then we'll, of course, have some discussion and questions, and we'll just highlight a few upcoming events. So who are we? CPAR is a centre of excellence in population ageing research, and the centre includes 4 different research streams on all sorts of things like demographics and financial modelling and cognitive changes in workers and so on. But what our stream focuses on is the role of organisations and workplaces in fostering healthy ageing, and also conversely, you know, what we can do to support healthy and productive mature workers in organisations. So we're composed of 2 teams. We have CPAR Perth team and CPAR Sydney team, and you can see all of the different colleagues who are part of this organisation's mature workforce stream. We have a little model that some of you will be familiar with that we use to sort of think about how is it that we can create organisations that support mature workers or older workers. And this is our 3I model. And the basic idea being that we need to create organisations in which people feel included. And that really draws on various sorts of theories around, you know, people stereotyping and these sorts of things that can lead to mature workers being potentially treated negatively or with discrimination. So include is all about rectifying that. The second part of the model is individualise, and this is really speaks to theories like lifespan development, which show that people change as they get older. Their needs change, their abilities can change, and we really need to accommodate those changes. And then the third component is integrate, and that really speaks to this idea that if we have a more mature workforce, by definition, we have a more diverse workforce in terms of age, younger and older people, and we really need to think consciously and put in place strategies to integrate across that diversity. So today, in fact, the presentation is about job crafting. So it really nicely fits in the individualised component of our model because it's all about what do we need to do to allow people to adjust their work or to adjust the work for them so that they can accommodate those changing needs and abilities that I mentioned earlier. So without further ado, I'm absolutely delighted to introduce today Professor Dorien Kooij, who is a Professor of Human Resource Studies from Tilburg University in the Netherlands, as you can see there. She graduated with distinction in business economics at the University of Amsterdam. She's also worked for 3 years as a HR practitioner in various roles before she even started her PhD. Her PhD was on motivating older workers, so she's a real expert in this topic, and her PhD was in fact awarded a dissertation award, multiple dissertation awards in fact. As you'll see, Dorien's research focuses on ageing at work, and in particular, what sort of HR practices are important for mature workers and how things like work motivation change with ageing and of course job crafting, which is going to be the topic for today. She recently received a grant for a project called Retaining Older Workers, the Role of Job Crafting. So I'm absolutely thrilled now to hand you over to Dorien.
So thank you for introducing me. So as you mentioned, I will talk today about successful aging at work, and then particularly focus on the role of job crafting. And what I would like to do is first present a conceptual model that we recently introduced, and then show you some conceptual work that we've been doing to test parts of this model. And at the end of the presentation, I would like to also share some ideas for future research that we have. So I hope this works. Yeah, I don't think I need to spend a lot of time on talking about why I do this research. So I think in Australia as well as in the Netherlands, we have an aging workforce, which has a number of detrimental consequences, like an unaffordable pension system, labor market shortages, because many older workers retire at the moment. And also for older workers themselves, they are at risk to no longer be able to work or to have a lower motivation. So we think it's important to facilitate successful aging at work, and therefore to do research on it, to know a bit more on what factors could help older workers to age more successfully in the workplace. So what do we mean by successful aging at work? Well, there are many definitions on this, some discussion going on. But recently I introduced this definition together with some other researchers. And there we say that successful aging at work is the proactive maintenance of or adaptive recovery after decline to high levels of ability and motivation to continue working among older workers. And here ability is about being physically and psychologically able to work. So this might be indicated by high job performance, workability, and employability, for example. And motivation to continue working is more about being willing to continue working. So this might be indicated by work engagement or job satisfaction, for example. And in my research, I argue that a continuous person-environment fit is crucial for successful aging at work. Because as Sharon already pointed out, when people get older, many things change. So their abilities change. For example, crystallized intelligence improves, fluid intelligence declines. There are changes in motives. So when people get older, there's a shift away from extrinsic motivation towards more intrinsic motivation. And so in order to make sure that there is a fit between the person and the environment, something needs to change also in the environment. And it's important to focus continuously on having this fit between the person and the environment. And another reason why I focus on this fit is also because of the individualized approach that also already Sharon pointed out. There are many differences also among older workers. And we know actually that when people get older, that differences between them even increase. So although there are these more general changes in motivation, for example, when people get older, also differences between persons and become much larger when they get older. And therefore, it's important to focus on this fit. Furthermore, we argue that there's a large role for older people themselves to try to improve this fit. And this is based on lifespan theories, which have found that older people are very active when it comes to dealing with the aging process. So they engage in all kinds of strategies to make sure that they can still perform their jobs. So for example, selecting fewer work goals, asking for assistance, using tools. So there are many things that older workers actually already do themselves. And of course, we also know from the literature on proactive work behavior that many people are proactive at work, and that also holds for older workers, of course. So sort of combining these two approaches, so this focus on fit and this focus on an active role, we say that actually self-regulation is an important behavior to age successfully at work in the workplace. And as Sharon already said, I will focus mainly on job crafting today. So building on these ideas, together with some co-authors, we developed this process model on successful aging at work. And I will guide you through it. So on the right-hand side, you can see the outcome, which is successful aging at work. So as I said, this is about maintaining the ability and motivation to continue working. And as I just explained, we think that this is the result of this perceived fit between the person and the environment. So you can see that in the middle, so here. And here you can distinguish between two types of fit. So on the one hand, there is the demands abilities fit. So do the demands of the environment of the job fit with the abilities of the older worker? And there's the needs supplies fit. So whether the needs of the older worker are actually fulfilled by what the environment or the job offers. And so what we propose is that when people have a misfit, or they have an anticipated misfit, that will trigger this self-regulation process. So that if they indeed have this idea that in the future their job might change because of technological advancement, so they already anticipate that there will be a misfit, they will start to proactively adapt something to make sure that there is this fit again. And similarly, if they expect something to happen maybe in their own knowledge, so that their knowledge might be outdated in a while, then that also triggers this self-regulation behavior. On the other hand, it might also be that they already have a in the HR practices of their organization, which already caused a misfit, and then again this triggers this self-regulation. So there's this distinction between what we call proactive and adaptive self-regulation. So proactive is much more aimed at anticipated misfits, whereas adaptive self-regulation is aimed at an already experienced misfit. So this is one distinction that we make in these self-regulation behaviors, so being either proactive or adaptive. And also we distinguish between goal engagement and goal disengagement. And this is building on the work of Jutta Heckhausen. So on the one hand, you can strive towards a goal, but on the other hand, if the goal is no longer attainable, then people might also disengage from this goal and try to find another goal. So building on these two distinctions, we actually have this model on types of self-regulation behavior that people might engage in. So either being proactive, so aimed much more at maintaining fit when you actually anticipate a misfit, or adapting self-regulation behavior, which is much more aimed at restoring the fit when you have already experienced a misfit. And on the one hand, people might engage in goal pursuit, so really trying to strive towards a goal, or they might disengage from a goal when it's no longer attainable. So as an example, here you can see that when people are proactively trying to maintain their fit by goal engagement, they might set certain career goals, they might engage in health promotion activities, or they might, for example, proactively develop their skills. So different types of proactive or different types of self-regulation behaviors that we distinguish, in which people can also use these behaviors actually simultaneously or also subsequently. Then on the left-hand side of the model, we have identified a number of environmental factors and personal factors that on the one hand might trigger a misfit, or they might enable this self-regulation process. So as I mentioned, for example, when there is a change in the HR policies of an organization, this might actually trigger a misfit, which is indicated by these dashed lines here. And then that will, of course, sort of set in motion this self-regulation process in which this misfit triggers self-regulation behaviors, and hopefully these self-regulation behaviors will lead to an improved fit. So these dashed lines actually refers to changes in the environment or in the person that trigger a misfit. But on the other hand, these environmental and personal factors might also enable people to self-regulate. Because, for example, certain HR practices like more age-inclusive HR practices or having a participatory leader, that might help all the workers to engage in these self-regulation behaviors. And also certain personal factors such as proactive personality might also help all the workers to engage in this self-regulation behaviors. So these factors, these environmental, personal factors, on the one hand, trigger a misfit, but they might also enable people to engage in the self-regulation process. So this is a conceptual model that we've quite recently introduced. And as I said, I would like to show you a number of studies that we have done that tested parts of the model. And as Sharon already pointed out, in these studies, I focus on job crafting as a type of self-regulation behavior. And in the first study, I will focus on this link between job crafting and person-job fit. So really this in-between process. And job crafting, well, most of you might be aware of this, but these are self-initiated changes that individuals make in the task or relational boundaries of their work aimed at improving person-job fit. So here you might think of an HR professional who took on the role as career counselor to increase the meaningfulness of her work. And another example I came across was this healthcare professional who really had a passion for making music. And he tried to integrate that in his work by making music together with his clients, and then experience much more fun at his work. While many different types of job crafting behavior have been distinguished, and recently Zhang and Parker, they have integrated all these different job crafting types or behaviors in this sort of integrative model. So the initiators of the job crafting concept, Wojcicki and Dutton, they distinguished between task, relational, and cognitive crafting. So here, task crafting means that you, for example, start a new project that really interests you, but it might also mean that you ask a coworker to take over one of your tasks. Relational crafting is much more about the relationships at work. So do you try to increase your network, for example, or maybe work more intensively together with a colleague from who you can learn? And cognitive crafting is more about how do you see your work? What is the goal of your work? How do the different tasks actually relate to each other? Then later, Timms and her colleagues, they introduced crafting in terms of resources and demands. So you could either increase your challenging demands, again, by taking on a nice project, or you can reduce your hindering demands, for example, by trying to ignore an emotionally demanding colleague. And you can increase the resources of your work, but for example, by increasing learning opportunities or increasing the autonomy. And then finally, Bruning and Campion, they introduced a distinction between approach and avoidance crafting, saying you could craft either to really gain something positive, or you can craft to prevent something that you don't really like. Well, and Zhang and Parker, they have integrated all these different types of job crafting behavior into this overarching framework, actually distinguishing 8 different types of job crafting behavior. So what we did, actually, we felt that these job crafting behaviors, they started too much from the job. So really looking at what kind of changes do we make in the job. And we felt that it would be important to actually start from the personal resources of the person, because the aim of job crafting is to change the job so that it fits the personal resources of an employee. And that's why we introduced 2 new job crafting behaviors. And this was job crafting towards strengths and job crafting towards interests. So a job crafting towards strengths is really trying to adjust your job in such a way that you can really do what you're good at, because strengths really refer to when you are at your best. And interests are really something that define the person. It's really about what really makes you tick. So job crafting here means that you really try to change your job to do something that you find, super interesting. So what we did in this first study is we developed and tested an intervention to stimulate this job crafting behavior. So in a nutshell, I will explain a bit more later, but we asked people to look at their job, to identify their strengths and interests, and to see, well, how well do they match and how can we improve that match. And of course, we expected that when people would participate in this intervention, that would increase their job crafting behavior. And in turn, we expected that if people would engage in this job crafting behavior, that would then also improve their person-job fit. Because, well, when you job craft, that's actually the aim, that you improve your person-job fit. And here we focused on this distinction that I explained before between demands, abilities, and needs, supplies, fits. And we expected that when people would participate in the job crafting intervention, that would lead to more job crafting behavior and in turn to a higher perceived person-job fit. Then we also expected a moderating role of age. So we expected that all the workers would benefit more from this job crafting intervention. And these expectations were built on the literature on personality development. So this literature argues that when people get older, they go through many situations, they take on new roles, like, for example, starting to work, becoming a parent, etc. And through these roles, people develop stronger and clearer identities, and they know better what their strengths and interests are. And at the same time, they become more mature. So this is called the maturity principle, that when people get older, they become more dominant, more responsible, more conscientious, etc. So they will be more able to reach their goals. And we argue they will be more able also to craft their jobs. So building on this literature, we say that when people get older, they know better what are my strengths and interests, and they are better able to also use these interests and strengths at work. So in a nutshell, this is the model that we tested. So arguing that this job crafting intervention would be more beneficial for all the workers and would help them to engage in more job crafting behavior and in turn to experience higher person-job fit. So as I said, this was an intervention, and what we did in this intervention was first, of course, a pre-test. So we asked people about their job crafting behaviors and their fit. Then they had this workshop, which was a 4-hour workshop with 7 steps, and we used an online tool here. And we asked people first to make an overview of their job tasks, and then to classify whether it's small, medium, or large, and then to see whether these are traditional or new tasks. So also to help people to see that actually their job changes over time. Then we asked them to indicate the top 3 of their personal strengths and of their interests. And then they started to sort of, well, they had this online system that helped them to make links between the strengths and interests and the tasks that they are doing to see, okay, what overlap is there? Which strengths am I currently not using in my work? Which task doesn't really reflect any of my strengths and interests? And then based on that analysis, they chose 3 tasks for a job crafting. And they formulated short-term job crafting goals and came up with a plan to work on those. And then after 2 weeks, we called them to evaluate progress to see how were they doing, how could we help them. And then we did a post-test again 2 weeks later. So as a sample, we had 86 participants from a health insurance company. So 31 people in the experimental group, 55 in the control group, and you can already see that this is not evenly distributed. And of course, we did assign them randomly, but these are people working, and if they don't have time, they need to switch. So that was unfortunate. You can also see here that the average age of the sample was quite young. So that was also too bad. Of course, we would have liked to have a more representative sample in that sense. We developed a new scale to measure the crafting towards strengths and interests. So here you can see some example items. So I organize my work in such a way that it matches my strengths. I actively look for tasks that match my own interests. And we also pilot tested these skills, of course, and also we could find that they actually explained more variance in addition to the scales of Petro et al. That measure the job crafting in terms of resources and demands. And then we had existing scales for demands, abilities fit and needs, supplies fit. So an example here is there's a good fit between the demands of my job and my personal abilities, and my current job offers everything what I expect from a job. So some results. I put it all on a slide here. I hope it's easy to follow. What you can see here is, first of all, that the job crafting intervention had no effect on job crafting towards strengths. And job crafting towards strengths did have a positive influence on needs, supplies, and demands, abilities fit. So that's indicated by the numbers here. However, there was a moderating effect of age. And this effect was such that the indirect effect of this job crafting intervention, so participating in the intervention, had actually in the end a negative effect on the needs, supplies fit of younger workers through job crafting towards strengths. And the same was the case for demands, abilities fit. But for all the workers, we found that indeed when they participated in the job crafting intervention, it would increase their strengths, crafting behavior, and then in turn their person-job fit. And then these were the results for job crafting towards interests. And here you can see that we actually only found one significant effect here, that job crafting towards interest leads to higher needs, supplies fit. So what does this teaches us? So that this job crafting intervention has a positive indirect effect on the needs, supplies, and demands, abilities fit via job crafting towards strengths, but only for older workers. Well, I put here between brackets middle age because it was such a young sample. But nevertheless, some indication that this intervention might be helpful for older workers. So there were some unexpected negative findings for the younger workers. And here we reasoned that since they are not yet so mature, they don't really know yet what their strengths and interests are. We think that when they found that there was a misfit between themselves and their job based on the exercises that they did, that they actually would start changing something in themselves, so that they would, for example, start engaging in learning. Also, there were no effects on job crafting towards interest, and this we explained by the fact that all the workers are very loyal. They have a very high OCB, so really eager to do something extra for the organization. So we reasoned that probably they would like to use their strengths to benefit the organization, but really doing something that they like just for their own good is not something that they would do. So that was our reasoning here. And finally, as a more practical indication, job crafting intervention can be a practical tool to stimulate job crafting behavior. That's a typo. So in a second study, we looked at this link here. So looking at the link between job factors, job crafting, and indicators of successful aging at work. And here we actually did a daily diary study among older workers. And we focused on two types of crafting, that is interest crafting again, but also work pressure crafting, because we also wanted to see or show that indeed when all the workers engage in this crafting towards their personal resources, that would be more beneficial than crafting in terms of reducing their work pressure. So work pressure crafting is crafting to reduce work pressure, and in that sense it's also a bit similar to decreasing hindering demands. So in this diary study, first of all, we proposed that when all the workers engage in interests crafting, this would improve their work motivation and job performance as indicators of successful aging at work. And our reasoning here was that, well, if you craft, you increase your person job fit, and that would then lead to these positive outcomes. At the same time, we didn't expect any positive effects of work pressure crafting because this is really a loss-based strategy, and we feel that it doesn't really work in a work situation because it's very hard actually to get rid of some tasks. And that's also what earlier research has shown on reducing hindering demands, that actually we find no effects or even negative effects. So that's why we expected that also for all the workers, this would not be beneficial. Then next, we expected that when people would have an active job, or in this case, actually more an active workday, that would trigger their job crafting behavior or their interest crafting. So the idea here is that when people have high work pressure, they are activated, and then this job autonomy helps them to channel this activation into proactive behavior. But we expected that only interest crafting would be triggered and not work pressure crafting. And this is because, well, there are a number of lifespan theories. So for example, the socio-emotional selectivity theory that proposes that all the workers, because they have less time left in the workplace, they will focus much more on having pleasant experiences. And so we reasoned that crafting your job in terms of interests would be more fun, more pleasurable than work pressure crafting, just trying to get rid of something. And that therefore, an activating workday would only trigger this interest crafting. And also we reasoned based on selection optimization and compensation model. And research on this model shows that when people experience momentary goal conflict, that then they will focus much more on optimization and not so much on loss-based strategies. So again, we felt that, well, interest crafting is more optimization, and this work pressure crafting is more a loss-based strategy. And therefore, on these activating work days, all the workers would engage in interest crafting and not so much in work pressure crafting. So this was the model that we wanted to examine. And we started this model, as I said, using a daily diary, because we know that this job crafting behavior is something that people do on a daily basis. And we surveyed all the workers from a casino, rehabilitation center, and an online marketing agency. And you can see the average age was 51, and 45% of the sample were female. So we used mainly existing scales to measure our concepts. And here the Compass Alphas are the average of the work days. So for autonomy, could you decide by yourself how you performed your work today? Work pressure, for example, did you have too much work to do today? Daily interest crafting, today I by myself changed my work to make it more interesting. Work pressure crafting, today I reduced the number of my tasks. Then work engagement, today I felt happy when working intensively. And for job performance, today how would you evaluate your performance in general? And then what we did was a multi-level analysis a multi-level path analysis to test our hypotheses. So first I would like to show you the results for interest crafting. So as expected, we found that when all the workers engage in interest crafting, that would increase their work engagement and also their job performance. And also as expected, we found that when people have an activating workday, that then this triggers interest crafting. So the interaction effect between work pressure and job autonomy was significant. So there was an indirect effect of this activating workday on work engagement and job performance through interest crafting of, you can see it here, 0.16 and 0.09. So, well, I'll come back to that later. Oh yeah, here you can see the graph. So yeah, here you can see that this relationship between work pressure and interest crafting is positive when there is high autonomy, and it's actually almost negative when there is low autonomy. Then the results for work pressure crafting. So here we found actually a negative effect on work engagement and job performance. So when all the workers engage in work pressure crafting, their work engagement and their job performance actually decreases. And also as expected, or this was actually as expected, that when there is an activating workday, that this does not trigger work pressure crafting. So this interaction effect between work pressure and job autonomy was not significant. And maybe also interesting to know that work pressure has a positive influence on work pressure crafting, and job autonomy had a positive influence on interest crafting. So yeah, I also thought it was an interesting finding. So for the discussion, well, daily interest crafting is positively associated with daily work engagement and job performance. So this is an indication that indeed this interest crafting might be helpful for successful aging at work. Daily work pressure crafting, however, was negatively associated. And on activating work days, all the workers indeed engage in this interest crafting, but not in work pressure crafting. And as I said, daily work pressure was positively associated with work pressure crafting. So some practical implications, I think, is that it's important for organizations to provide all the workers with activating jobs or workdays. So oftentimes we see that there is this tendency to lower the job demands of all the workers. But I think it is actually much more important to increase their autonomy so that they can use crafting to improve their fit and their work engagement and job performance. And also I felt that it's important because it's contradicting to some common stereotypes that all the employees are less able to handle stress, are less adaptable and flexible. But actually here we show that all the workers engage in interest crafting, so they can actually in this way effectively deal with work pressure. So I also hope that that helps to to get rid of some of these stereotypes that are still around. How am I doing on time? Okay. A final study that I would like to show is more on an organizational factor. So here what we looked at was this link between HR practices and job crafting behavior. So how can an organization actually stimulate job crafting behavior? And here we focused on overarching job crafting types that we introduced that sort of include the other job crafting behaviors that I described earlier. And we distinguished these three job crafting types based on the literature on lifespan development. So in this literature, three main goals are distinguished, three main life goals, actually. So this literature says that people in different domains across their lifespan, that they have three different goals. So the first is growth. So really trying to improve your functioning, to get better, to learn. The second is maintenance. So this is when you have actually reached a functioning or performance level and you can no longer improve. Then your focus will be to maintain that level of functioning in the face of challenges, for example. And then when maybe something happens in your physical health, or maybe in your work situation, it might be that you're no longer able to maintain these levels of performance, and then regulation of loss becomes an important goal. So here you try to actually function adequately at a lower level. And building on these three lifespan developmental goals, we distinguish these three types of crafting. So first, accommodative crafting, which is really about regulating losses in your personal resources. So this is actually crafting activities aimed at reducing your physical, cognitive, emotional, and quantitative demands. Then utilization crafting is more aimed at maintaining current levels of performance by utilizing the knowledge and skills that you have, and by maintaining an interest in your job. So that's this type of crafting. And then development crafting is much more aimed at growth. So really trying to reap your own growth potential and to build your personal resources. So these are crafting activities aimed at learning and increasing challenging demands and responsibilities. So in this study, we wanted to examine whether organizations can stimulate these job crafting behaviors among older workers. And for this, we focused on opportunity enhancing HR practices, which are HR practices aimed at involving employees in work tasks, goal setting, and decision making. And opportunity enhancing HR practices, they are distinguished based on the AMO model that we use a lot in HR research. So the AMO model proposes that people need to have the ability, the motivation, and the opportunity to perform. And building on that framework, we hence distinguish ability enhancing, motivation enhancing, and opportunity enhancing HR practices. And here we focus on opportunity enhancing HR practices because they are more directly related to a job crafting behavior, because they are really about involving employees and making sure that employees participate in goal setting and in decision making. So as an example of HR practice, you can think of autonomy, teamwork, decentralized decision making, a bit broad job descriptions, things like that. And our idea was that when an organization offers these opportunity enhancing HR practices, that employees will see these as a cue that they are really allowed or even expected to be involved in these work tasks, in goal setting and in decision making. And that this in turn would actually improve their psychological empowerment. So psychological empowerment, as is said here, it's a set of psychological states that are necessary for individuals to feel a sense of control in relation to their work. So this is indicated, for example, by self-determination and meaning. So people really feel that they can have an influence on their work. And that, again, would, in our mind, lead to more job crafting behavior. So the model that we studied here was that when there is a change in perception of these opportunity enhancing HR practices, that would lead to an improvement in psychological empowerment and in turn to an improvement in this job crafting behavior. So again, we did a study among older workers. It was a particular group because they were employed by a temporary employment agency, quite old, as you can see here. So we used existing scales to measure opportunity enhancing practices and psychological empowerment. So an example item is employees are invited to participate in a wide range of issues, including performance standards, quality improvements, benefits, etc. And for psychological empowerment, I have a large impact on what happens in my department. For the job crafting, we again introduced a measure. And also we pilot tested it in another sample, linked it to other concepts like proactive personality, but also the TIMS crafting types to show that it was a relevant scale. And here you can see some items. So for example, for accommodative crafting, I try to simplify my tasks. I make sure my work is not so stressful. For development crafting, I take on tasks from which I can learn. And utilization crafting, I ensure I get those tasks that I enjoy. So we did structural equation modeling, and this was the model that was the result. So main results here are that indeed opportunity enhancing HR practices would lead, or a change in opportunity enhancing HR practices would lead to a change in psychological empowerment, a positive change, and this in turn would lead to a positive change in utilization crafting and a positive change in developmental crafting, but again, not in accommodative crafting. So similar as the daily diary study, we could trigger these types of interest crafting and here also developmental crafting, but we didn't really find a way to trigger accommodative crafting or work pressure crafting. And so the indirect effect of these opportunity enhancing HR practices through psychological empowerment on development crafting was 0.06, so was significant, and on utilization crafting was 0.05. So what we found was that opportunity enhancing HR practices have an indirect effect on development and utilization crafting via psychological empowerment, but again, not on accommodative crafting. And as a practical implication, organizations could implement and communicate these opportunity enhancing practices, such as flexible work assignments, participation in decision making, and broadly designed jobs, because that helps to increase job crafting behavior, which, well, as shown earlier, has positive effects on fit and on work engagement and job performance. Then briefly, because I see I'm running out of time, some ideas for future research. So first of all, for now I focus a lot on job crafting behavior, but I think there are many other self-regulation behaviors that all the workers engage in at work. And I think it would be good to try to identify these behaviors and also examine which self-regulation is actually most beneficial for successful aging at work. Secondly, I would like to look much more into the dynamics of this self-regulation process, because I think it's a momentary, intra-individual process, and it is also including self-regulatory resources, because we've been finding also that when people engage in job crafting behavior, it actually also costs energy. So the process might look something like this, that people engage in job crafting, and this will cost them energy, but it will also lead to better fit, and that might then again lead to more affect, more self-efficacy. So it's likely an ongoing process, and I think it would be nice to study that, for example, with more experience sampling methods. So following people during the day with an app, for example, and even better to also link those momentary processes to the more longer term successful aging at work. Then thirdly, I think it's important to look at the heterogeneity of these older workers. So we focus a lot on older workers as a homogeneous group, as if they're all the same, but there are many differences between older workers. So I think for future research, it would be good to use person-centered approaches to see whether we can identify subgroups of older workers that are maybe more successful, less successful, and also see how can we identify these groups and how can we help the groups at risk, and maybe even go a step further and try to personalize interventions, because older workers are so different. And finally, as I showed, I looked at a number of personal and environmental factors, and of course others have done the same. But I think more research can be done here, also looking at this interaction between the personal and environmental factors at different levels. And I think also we can do more intervention studies to see, what really works and why does it work. So also evaluating them more qualitatively, maybe. That's it. Thanks a lot for listening.